plan to duplicate the Midlands Highway from Montreal. That's an important national project. It's a particularly important project for Tasmania. Of course, your two largest cities should be linked by a four-lane highway. And the program, the plan that's put on the table by Will Hodgson and his team is realistic, it's affordable for Tasmania, and it's affordable for the Commonwealth. I was amazed to hear the Prime Minister say it was too much money. Here's the guy that's out spending money like it's going out of fashion, not by the millions, but by the billions. And yet a $400 million commitment to Tasmania for its major highways was too much money, and unaffordable. You wonder where the priorities are from this guy. The biggest spending Prime Minister in our history, the guy who's going to give us our biggest debt, is the man who boasts all the time about his infrastructure expenditure, the biggest infrastructure program of all time. In reality, they're actually going to spend less money on rail and road than the coalition had committed before the last election. So don't listen to the rhetoric, just look at the facts. They're actually spending less than what we had promised to spend, by quite a lot, by about $5 to $7 billion less they're going to spend on road and rail than we had committed. Maybe that's why they haven't got the money for the Midland Highway, but we're determined to make it available and to do it in a constructive and equitable way so that this very worthwhile project can be achieved to support Tasmania. It's been great to be here, and I feel a bit outnumbered with 3 senators in the one place. I'm the only House of Representatives member. You do have an excellent Senate team from Tasmania, and you can be very proud of the contribution that they made to debate in the national capital, not just in the Senate, but in the party room and in the development of policy through our various processes. I have to say, however, that your House of Representatives team is not nearly as good. So I am very anxious that you get behind your candidates and Eric here in line, but also across the state. We do need to have representation on our side of politics from Tasmania if we're going to be a strong and effective government. Now, it was even worse when we had a government that was on our side of politics and very few Tasmanian federal members. It means there is a risk that you will miss out when important things happen. Now, certainly your Senate team have been very strong in putting the case and very effective, but you need people in the House of Representatives also if Tasmania is going to get its fair share. So we're happy to help, do what we can. In the end, you know, it's the local people who make the choice of the people they want to represent them. You've got some good candidates and you'll have a good team whenever the next federal election is called, and I appeal to you to do what you can to get them elected, so that we can start turning our country around before the debt, before the problems of this government just become irreparable. Now, you'd be all aware that we're going through a bit of a tough trough in Canberra at the present time. The media is giving us a rough time, and sometimes we contribute a bit to that ourselves. It takes a bit of getting used to be in opposition, and that's something we don't want to do. We don't want to get stuck in an opposition rut. We want to be back in government as quickly as we can. But we do have to be able to demonstrate that we're a strong and effective team so that people will trust us to do the job again in the future. One of the most difficult issues we're having to deal with at the present time, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow and over the next 3 or 4 weeks, is Labor's carbon pollution reduction standard, the EPS. And I think nearly everybody I've spoken to tonight has raised that issue with me. So I know that it's a matter of considerable concern right across the nation. And the reality is that while people are talking about it, very few people really understand what an emissions trading scheme actually is. In fact, some of the polls show as many as 90% of the population admit that they don't know what an emissions trading scheme is or how it will work. And having spent a bit of time reading Labor's legislation, frankly, I think the other 10% are lying. The more you read the bill, the more incomprehensible it is. detail in it, and that hasn't even been written yet. And yet the government is asking us to vote on this scheme without making any changes and do it before the Prime Minister trots off to a United Nations climate change meeting in Copenhagen. Now, the United Nations isn't asking Australia or any other country to come to this meeting with an already legislated emissions trading scheme in place. No other country is going to have one. All we've been asked to do is to come with targets. And we agreed on those targets months ago. So Kevin Rudd has got all he needs to take in his policy bag with him to the Copenhagen meeting. So it's all bluster to suggest that somehow or other we've got to have an emissions trading scheme in place by that day. He wants to do it as a political stunt. Or before people start asking too many questions about the detail of his package. And it's when you get into the detail that the real problems arise. Now, I know that there are some people who question the science and are not convinced that the climate change that's occurring is any different from what happens in other parts of has happened through history. Some people don't believe that there's much humans can do about it anyhow. So we've just got to adjust to these sorts of things. But certainly, if the majority of scientists are right, the implications of climate change will be very serious. And if there are things we can do to help mitigate that risk, then we should do this. And bear in mind also that we take out insurance policies. We don't want our house to burn down, and we think it won't, but we take out an insurance policy just in case it does. And so maybe the planet also deserves the benefit of the doubt. And if we are a part of some kind of a global response to these issues, well then maybe there are things we can do that will mitigate any risk. You see, the problem, however, is that Australia doesn't emit very much of the world's CO2 gases, which is supposed to be causing all this trouble. And we're responsible for about 1.4% of global emissions. So if we stop breathing and making things and travelling or doing anything, we would reduce global emissions by 1.3%. But the Chinese, their emissions are going up by that amount and more every few months. In fact, Australia's share of global emissions is going down. It's not going up, it's going down. And even on a per capita basis, we're not amongst the biggest emitters in the world. The biggest emitters are mainly the big energy producing countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the like. We rank well down the list, in spite of what you may hear the Greens say from time to time. So we can't fix it by ourselves. If we in fact act to close down industry in Australia to reduce CO2 emissions, somebody else will start one up in another part of the world. We're not going to go without this just because we're concerned about the CO2 emissions in Australia. And Wacker tells a good story, and I probably shouldn't tell his story while he's here, but it's a good story. It's a good example of what actually happens under an emissions trading scheme. Just recently, a cement manufacturing facility at Rockhampton announced that it would be closing, and 50 Australians are going to lose their jobs. And they're closing because of a series of problems the factory has, but essentially because they believe there's no future for cement manufacture in Australia if we have a carbon pollution reduction scheme. Because cement manufacture is perhaps one of the worst pollutants, one of the worst CO2 emitters. In fact, you emit 0.8 of a tonne of CO2 emissions for every tonne of cement that you make. And so the cost of an emissions trading scheme on the cement industry will be very high.